Hello, and welcome to Devlog number 22. In case you've missed the number of announcements on our Discord or in the trailer that I just posted on our YouTube channel, we have an official release date for NEBULOUS now, which is 11 February 2022. We're really excited to finally get the game out the door and into the hands of a wider audience. I'm really happy with the state of the game as it is now, and it's only going to get more polished as we get closer to that February release date. I have a little whiteboard that I hung above my desk that has the number of days left until release. My wife questions why I would do that to myself and put that stress up there, but I think it's a nice reminder of just how close we actually are. Speaking of which, we had a really awesome community night on Saturday where we got a bunch of people together, had 3 really cool games, well, 2.5 really cool games, where we filmed a bunch of awesome footage that I cut up into that trailer that you saw the clip of at the beginning. And that's our official early access release trailer. I'm really excited that we got that out. I've been dreaming of making that video for 2 years now, and we're going to be basically releasing right on the 2-year mark of development, which is really cool. Now, let's talk about the last couple weeks. Probably the most immediately visible change is going to be the new UI look and feel. I had always intended to replace the old UI, but graphic design is scary and hard, and I didn't really have any great ideas, so I spent a while perusing the internet looking for references, looking for ideas that I liked and things that I wanted to avoid. Then I sat down, fired up Inkscape, and did not let myself leave it until I had some concepts for windows and buttons and other controls that I liked. The first thing I did was come up with a unified set of colors, and we actually changed the nebulous orange, which you may notice in the logo here. It's very slightly, has some more red in it. It's kind of more of a blood orange than the bright, full orange that we had before. And the base color for the UI is now gray instead of the orange that it was before, which results in 1,000% less chance of eye bleed. The first concept that I did for a modal window actually had orange as the base color, but when I showed it to the testers to get their opinion on it, their reaction was, "God, please no." So they recommended that I switch the color so that gray was the primary rather than the accent, and I'm really glad they did. I think it looks a lot better this way. The windows have a few greebles around them just to add some accents here and there, and then I also came up with these buttons that I like that have the kind of line off to the side. I like the offset text. The cancel button has these red stripes on it when you click on it. I think that also works really well with the disabled buttons, which are gray with stripes, which you might see later. That base window design is used for all of the modal windows, like the profile editor that you just saw. But I also did custom layouts for all of the major menus. For example, this is the skirmish lobby. And then we also have these unified controls now, such as the drop-down menus, the hard-edged buttons, and the standard buttons. And then this is the multiplayer browser, which I really like the layout of this one. But the bottom line is that I actually like looking at my UI now, which is a really nice change of pace from having to constantly think about when am I going to replace this. On top of the obvious facelift along with the rest of the UI, the Fleet Editor also got a couple of quality of life improvements. Both of these suggestions were provided by players, the first of which is these accordion drawers in both the ship component list and the ship's stat list. This makes it so that you can collapse away things that you don't want to look at the moment, and it makes it a little easier and declutters the UI quite a bit. On the ship stats, we have these buttons to collapse and expand all, so that you can quickly jump to the thing that you want to see and then expand that and keep it visible while you're working. Another major addition is the ability to hover over these stat modifier bonuses and see exactly which modules you have installed that are providing the buffs or debuffs so that you know what you can add more of or take off or trade points for. They don't work for certain modifier percentages like the amount of power bonus that you're getting because that's not actually a stat. It's calculated from the amount of power that you should have versus the amount that you actually have. But for the most part, almost all of these can be hovered over and it'll show you where the bonuses are coming from. There was also an interesting exploit that could be done in the Fleet Editor's initial formation setup where, because it would position the formation based on where the guide was when you chose the arrival positions, and there was no maximum size of a formation, if you placed one of the escorts 10 kilometers away and then started the game, you could end up with a ship on the other side of the map when the game actually started. This also led to another issue where under certain conditions, escorts could end up arriving inside of asteroids and then be unusable basically for the rest of the game. So now in order to fix these, there's a maximum distance that you can set an escort to in the Fleet Editor. There's no limit in the actual game, but in the Fleet Editor there is a limit now. And also, when the arrival position of the ships is calculated, it's doing it from the furthest back escort instead of the position of the guide is where the arrow will actually show you them arriving. On the customization front, we finally have hull badges being rendered on ships. It's really simple because all you have to do is take a 256 by 256 PNG image, drop it in the folder, and it'll show up in this list here. You can select it and it will be sent to all the other players in your game so they'll all be able to see your badge. There's no Steam modding necessary. You don't need to have something on the workshop. You just have the file on your computer and it does the transfer correctly. As is standard at this point, the tactical view also got a couple improvements. The first of which is lines showing active engagements in your fleet and your allies. What this will do is that when you target weapons on a ship or even on a position, it will show a red dashed line in the tactical view showing you what ships are actively engaging what other contacts. And this works for every engagement and for every ship, so if you have one ship targeting multiple tracks, you'll have multiple lines coming out of it. It even works for missile waypoint shots, so until the last missile is launched, it'll show you a path of dotted red lines showing the waypoint path that those missiles are going to follow. I also made an improvement to the sliced sphere renderer, so now when you lower and raise your cursor on the dial widget, it shows you the sliced spheres moving up and down, including the edge of the map, so it's a lot easier to see when you are or are not going to be traveling into bounds or out of bounds or into a sphere of influence that you want to be inside of without having to kind of guess. Similar to that, I also added a feature to the shader that's used to render the asteroids or any obstacle in the tactical view, showing an orange line for whatever the current plane is, and that also works with the dial widget when you're moving the cursor up and down, which makes it a little easier to see on these irregular shapes where your cursor is ending up relative to them, which should make placing movement orders a little easier. And finally, when you have multiple players coordinating over voice on the same team in multiplayer, they tend to call out track numbers, such and such track is primary, and then everyone has to kind of scramble to figure out where on their screen that track actually is. So I added a hook track feature, so the way that works is you hit Q, enter the 4-digit track number, and it zooms your camera to where that is and puts a little marker around it to indicate that it's the track that you want to look at. I think this should make coordinating fire in multiplayer games a little easier. On the balance front, people have been clamoring for a buff to beams for a really long time. I didn't want to just simply raise the values because against some targets the beams are just absolutely devastating, like a Corvette taking a battleship beam will just get destroyed instantly. I wanted to buff the destroyer specifically because it's really hard to get it into a position where it can really make use of the beam since it's such a close range weapon, and you have to put the ship in so much danger just to be able to use it. So what I ended up doing is that beams are now eligible for battle short with a ridiculously high probability of damage for every second that they're running over the amount of time that they would normally run for. And on top of that, I added an intrinsic modifier to the destroyer hull that significantly reduces that probability of damage, which means that the destroyer with a damage control team repairing the beam can basically run its spinal beam almost indefinitely, whereas a battleship running beam turrets in battle short will burn them out in about 30 seconds beyond what the normal firing time would be. Something that's been missing for a while, long overdue to add as with many things, is an actual station model for the station capture game mode. Stefmo did a really great job taking the concept that I painted a while back and turning it into the model that we're using now. Since it's an outpost station, it's got plenty of windows and flashing lights on it, it's not a warship, it's not heavily armored. In terms of the actual design itself, I really like the long vertical look of it. I also wanted to have kind of a pier structure where ships could pull alongside and dock, which will be important in a future Conquest game mode, so I wanted to set that style up now so that we can use it again later. Alright, I've covered a lot so far, but I haven't even touched on the two major things that I did over the last month or so, which consumed almost all of my time. The first of those is saving and loading games. So what you can do now is in a skirmish game, single player only, you can save a game to a file, it'll save the fleet states, it'll save the damaged masks that are on the ships, even it'll include weapons that are currently in flight, so any missiles or shells that you launch will be restored from the save file when you load that game back. This was a huge amount of effort. It took almost all of the time for the sprint, maybe 80% of it. I didn't really quite realize how much state there really is in this game until I started trying to do this. And the 2 or 3 weeks that it took me to do this seems like it actually didn't take a lot of time, and the reason for that is that I've been working on the save load facilities and state saving for almost a year at this point. Little pieces here and there, building up the infrastructure for it so that when I actually got to accomplishing this task, I would have the foundation and I would just build upon that. And I'm glad that I started stretching it out over all that time, because doing all of this in one go would have been a nightmare and I probably would have just quit on it halfway through. The other thing that took a lot of time was the complete rework of the damage control UI. To refresh your memory, the old UI was a list-based, so over in the bottom right corner you'd expand this vertical list which would show you the list of all your damaged components. their health, any status effects, the progress to repair them, and they were all sorted by the priority that the damage control teams would be assigned to them. The issue with this was that it was very difficult to navigate and find the actual thing that you were looking for. This was compounded by the fact that because the list was sorted by priority, if something higher priority than what you were about to click on got added to the list, that would get pushed down and then you'd have to go find it again. So I went with this damage control board solution, which was suggested by one of our players, and the really nice thing about it is that it's static. So clicking down here in the bottom right will bring up a full-size damage control board, which shows everything that you have mounted on the ship and the names of them, so you don't need to hover over them. However, you can also hover over the names to show you more information on what actually is in the modules, so you can see that this magazine has certain types of ammo in it. This is useful because it shows you exactly what the module is going to give you. If it's destroyed, you'll know that that's the one that you want to use your restore on. As the ship takes damage, both the module position boxes and the names at the end of the lines will both change colors to show you what the current state is. And the really neat thing about this UI is that it actually shows you the teams moving around the ship. So the position of the teams was actually always simulated and physicalized. However, you really couldn't see it in the old UI, but now you can actually see them leave the compartment they were in, travel to the new one, and then pop into its name and start working. While that's cool, the real benefit of this new UI design is that it allows me to see exactly where the things are actually located, so I know what exactly I want to restore or prioritize for repairing. So if I need to prioritize this top front cannon out of 3 of them, I don't need to hunt around the list to try to find it and guess which one it is. I just click on it in the DC board and it's prioritized. The major downside to this system is that on larger ships like the battleship, they get very cluttered very fast. So a future improvement to this is a filtering system that allows you to select just compartments, just modules, just mounts, for example. It wouldn't hide everything else, it would just subdue the colors so that it's a little easier to see the thing that you're actually looking for. Along with the UI change, there's been a pretty big improvement to the actual behavior of the DC teams. Let's take reactor overloads, for example. If you don't get them fixed in time, the whole ship explodes, so you obviously want to get them fixed as fast as possible. The issue here is that when you have certain debuffs in a compartment like fires or atmosphere leaks, they reduce the working speed of the teams. Because the teams always prioritize the most critical debuff, aka the reactor overload, they'll never work on the fire or the atmosphere leak until the reactor overload's repaired. However, because those other 2 debuffs are slowing their working speed, the optimal thing to do is to actually fix those other debuffs and then work on the reactor overload so they can finish it in time. What happens now is that the improvements to the DC system allow multiple teams to be in a compartment at the same time working on different tasks. So while you have one team working on the reactor overload, you can have another one working on the fire or the atmosphere leak that's slowing down the work of the other team doing the critical work. That covers all the tasks that I worked on in the last couple weeks. We have a release date. The holidays are almost here, which means that I'm going to have a lot more time to finish up the last couple tasks that we have to do before that release. And then that's basically going to involve feature locking the game, hopefully a couple weeks before we release, playing a bunch of games to make sure there's no critical errors and nothing really major is going wrong, and then pushing the big red button on Steam that actually makes it available for everyone to play, which is exciting and stressful, and I'm really looking forward to it, honestly. So that about wraps it up for this devlog, probably the penultimate one before our actual release. Don't forget to wishlist the game on Steam so you can get a notification when the game actually unlocks. And don't forget to drop by our Discord, the link is in the description to the video. You can chat with us, chat with our players. We have a really great community. They're always posting really cool screenshots and videos, so if you're interested in the game, it's a great place to hang out. See you in a few weeks. Thanks for watching.